Good evening, everyone. Hey, Dave, you guys hear me? It's Natty. Okay. So it's 1 minute after 8. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're a little bit behind, but the next couple sections are rather short. So my goal was to try to do a section each week, and we're still on section 2, and we're going into third week. So I'm hoping that we can be done, or a good part done, of section 3 tonight. So if you're not hearing me, if you're not seeing me, you might have to restart. But I know it's a localized issue for you because other people can hear and see me. So, so with that said, I want to start back with a little bit of review last night when last week when we were dealing with repeaters, because repeaters are going to be such an enormous part of the privileges that you have as a technician class operator. And we discussed a few concepts last week that I think are worth repeating. So if you understand, we've talked about, I'm going to go back in a couple slides here. I know that we've gone through a few of these. So, if you understand, some of you may understand this concept, get it well. Just bear with me for a minute as I get those caught up to speed, because I think it's really important, again, that you get a good grasp of repeaters. It's going to be part of your test. So typically, as you know, a repeater usually sits on a high elevation, on the top of a tall building, on top of a mountain, or a top of a tall tower. In North Carolina here, we have a ham radio repeater that is on top of one of our news station antennas, and it's 1,800 feet in the air. 1,800 feet is that's a tall tower. So, and then we have any of the mountaintops around here, we have repeaters. In North Carolina, the tallest mountain here is Mount Mitchell, and it has a repeater on top of it that can reach out to 7 states surrounding us. So, the one thing that you need to understand about a repeater is, again, just understand this this representation here. If Mobile wants to talk to his wife back at their house, he's trying to get around this mountain range. He's not going to be able to talk to her directly because the mountain's in the way, so he's going to have to use the repeater at the top that they both are going to communicate through. But in order to do that, they have to have a couple of settings already known in their radios, and one is an offset and one is a tone. And you can consider a tone to be like a key to your front door. Okay, everybody in your neighborhood could have the same manufacturer locks, the exact same, buy them at the same place, but your key's not going to work on your neighbor's door. It's very unique to your lock, hopefully. So, and that's what the repeaters try to do, just a frequency tone. It's subaudible. You can't hear it. It opens up the repeater and says, hey, listen up. And so the offset, though, is kind of important because, let me go back again here for a second, because in a typical signal, we have a carrier signal and then we have sidebands to that signal. And since the repeater is listening as it's transmitting, because as I'm talking into the repeater, there may be a half a second delay, and the person that I intend on calling is hearing me as I'm talking with just a little bit of delay. So there has to be an offset to where the the incoming signal is going to be the same as the outgoing signal. Okay, You want it to be side by side, so you don't want the lower sideband of the transmit to interfere with the upper sideband of the receive. Does that make sense? So there has to be an offset between these two. And so I want to get to let's see here. Okay, there we go. And when you have a mountaintop with a bunch of repeaters on it, you can actually you need that tone. It's very possible that there may be more than one repeater on this in this area that uses the exact same frequency, but the unique tone that it is set it for is only going to open up the intended repeater while the other one remains closed, even if they are set to the same frequency. So let's look at here for a second, the repeater and the offset. So as the repeater is set to transmit on one frequency and receive on the other. So the person calling out, so John wants to call his wife, okay? And we're going to say that this is John, and this is the wife. Writing with a mouse is not fun. Okay. J with a long J. John with a long J here. So the repeater is, as long as the wife doesn't key up, she's going to be listening to the receive frequency. Okay. So the repeater has two frequencies to it. It has one frequency that it transmits on and one that it listens to. The difference between those two is usually 0.6. Okay, and that is also called the offset. So when John goes to call his wife, he needs to transmit out to the frequency that the repeater receives on. And with the right tone set in it, he'll open that repeater up and talk in on this frequency. While he's talking, the repeater is transmitting. So John will come in at this frequency, and the repeater will talk out of its transmit frequency, which is the wife's receive frequency, is the same as the repeater's transmit frequency. Okay? And likewise, John, the repeater's receive frequency is going to be John's transmit frequency. And again, that tone is what's going to open up the repeater. Okay? And that's really all you ever need for a repeater setting when you set a channel in memory, is you need the offset, the tone, and the frequency that it is going to transmit on. When you set the offset and you go to key up, the radio will automatically step down 0.6 or step up 0.6. Okay? And that's really important that you do understand that. We had talked about what was the meaning of a procedural signal CQ. It just simply means calling all stations, calling any station. A good way to remember that is, it's another way of saying that someone is trying to seek you. So whenever you go to call out to somebody, you always want to call out the person you're calling, their call sign first and then yours. And then likewise, they will respond back by calling out your call sign and then theirs. Now, the best way to remember that is when you go to call somebody, if somebody calls your name, the first thing when you go to call out somebody's name is you want to get their attention so that they'll start listening. And then the first thing that they do when they hear their name calling is, well, who just called me? So if you can remember that, if you were trying to get somebody's attention, I wouldn't say, this is Natty, hey John. That doesn't make sense, right? We always say, hey John, this is Natty. So if you keep that in mind, it's always the other person's call sign first, whether you're receiving or transmitting. The other person's call sign first and then yours. And there's numerous ways that you can call out to say that you're on the air. I've heard people get on the air and say their call sign and then say mobile. I find that to be, maybe I'm just a little overreactive, but I find that to be a personal security issue, because my call sign is listed in the database. And, you know, a lot of people think thieves are stupid. That's why they have to steal. It's because they're not smart enough to work, when thieves have to be smarter than working folks. So I believe it's direct opposite of that. And I just like to think, I never want to underestimate a thief wanting in my house and wanting my equipment. And if they know that I'm calling out and I'm mobile, they know I probably have good radio equipment. I have electronics. I'm probably into electronics. Most ham folks are into electronics. And now I've just declared I'm mobile, meaning I'm not at home. So they get my call sign, they look up my address, and now they've got a treasure chest sitting there waiting in what could be an empty house. So I find that just say monitoring. That way they don't know if I'm in my car, if I'm in my living room, where I'm at. Just say your call sign and monitoring. If somebody wants to talk to you and strike up a conversation, they'll call out your call sign and then give theirs. And then when you hear that, you want to respond back, you give their call sign as a response, and then yours. So, you know, the band plan is just a guideline that just tells you what your privileges are, and as well as it tells us what modes are to be used at certain frequencies. And what I mean by that is, here's our band plan. You can get one of these free. They're everywhere. You just type in ham radio band plan in Google and you'll get this. Just make sure at the top, try to find one with the closest date. I would imagine this is going to get updated in 2019. Remember, I told you that they're going to change some of the tech privileges. You're more than likely in 2019, you're going to get more privileges. They usually aren't going to take your privileges away. That doesn't happen as often as expanding them. So look forward to maybe possibly hearing about new privileges in 2019. Even more reason to go get your license. So if you were an amateur radio operator, you're primarily going to be, generally these are going to be your frequencies right here. Okay. Now, on 10 meters, there is just a little bit of privileges that you get. That's the one down here at the bottom. You get a little bit of, and as the yellow here is single sideband voice. You can only, as a technician, talk on 10 meters single sideband. Okay, at 200 watt max. And then you get a little bit of data privileges. And actually, believe it or not, there is a lot of activity that happens right in this small little segment here. So just to let you know what the band plan does. So what is the term describes when a station is transmitting and receiving at on the same frequency? This should be a gimme. Just think simple. The most simplest form of communication, and that should give you your answer right, is both of you turn to one frequency and you start talking on that frequency. Simple, simplex. Best way to remember that. No offsets, no tones. So, you know, HF radio, one of the things I always say about HF radio and why you want it, you know, you'd like to get your generals, because you don't have to worry about offsets and tones and all that. You just turn this big fat little knob in the middle here, this little knob here, until this number changes and you start hearing a voice. It's either high pitch or low pitch, and you just tune it in, listen, and start talking. Real simple. The only thing about HF that you have to understand is just the filters. Understand what the filters do and which ones to apply to your situation. That's really the toughest thing, right? It really is. So which of the following is a guideline when choosing operating frequency for calling CQ? Well, let's think about this for a second. The three choices that they give you, Tina, you didn't miss anything. I've been in review. We're going forward now, so we're starting to cover stuff that we haven't covered before. But so the first thing you want to do is you want to listen, right? I mean, when you walk into a room and there's a group of people there and you're looking around for, to talk to folks, what's the first thing you do? You want to see if anybody else is talking, right? And then you ask them, can you be a part of the conversation? Or, pardon me, can I butt in? And then you want to make sure that, that you're welcome there, right? That you have the privileges to be there. You walk into a funeral and it's not, and you don't know the person, so anyway, so all these choices are correct. And because it is a worldwide hobby, at any given moment of the day, a net could be taking place on any frequency. And that's what they're really getting here is about nets, because there could be a net going on and the net control station is calling out and he's calling for traffic and he's got a little pause there. And all of a sudden you turn on your radio and you think that frequency isn't in use when there's just a little bit of a pause there and you kick in there and just start talking away. Can you imagine what that sounds like if you were participating in the net and somebody called in? First thing that comes into mind is what a tool, right? So first thing you do, make sure you're on the assigned frequency and then your privileges. So sit on the frequency for a little bit. Just take a minute. If it's such an emergency that you have to get in and say something right away, break. Saying the word break 3 times is universal for emergency and amateur radio. But just sit on it for a minute and listen to see if anybody else is talking. And then finally, just to be sure, just ask, is this frequency in use? Give your call sign, is it in use? And you don't get a response back, you're good. You're golden. You can sit on that frequency and call CQ all day long. So, and this is the thing about ham radio I want to tell you is that when it goes back to what I was telling you about the FCC enforcement officer, don't worry about breaking a rule and getting fined or getting arrested, or the FCC isn't worried about somebody like you. And I can tell you right now, when I was a general, I was getting on the extra bands and talking. Sometimes it was out of ignorance, and honestly, there was times when it was purposeful. And I wanted to have a conversation with an extra. Yes, it could have come down to my frequency, but the thing is that if you're kind and you're professional and you have manners about you, you're not giving anybody a reason to find out more about you. But if you get on there and you're a jerk, well, then what's the first thing people say is, where'd this guy come from? Man, look up his call sign, see where he's from. Oh, he's a technician. He's talking on general. Well, so, if you're professional about it, nobody usually makes a stink of it. They just don't care. Most people just let it pass by. It's really on how you bring the attention to yourself. So what is a common use of a reverse split function? So a lot of times we use the reverse split. So you remember when I told you about a repeater has a transmit frequency and a receive frequency? Well, typically you're going to have your radio set to the repeater's transmit frequency. Why? Because you can just set it on the desk, not touch anything, and you can hear everything that repeater's transmitting. But sometimes there are times, especially if you have a nice antenna and a nice radio and you get plenty of power, you want to determine if somebody's even getting into the repeater. So then you put it on you do a reverse split. Instead of listening to the repeater's transmit frequency, you listen to the repeater's receive frequency. Now you are hearing everything that's coming into that repeater. And if you know somebody's trying to call in, say a friend of yours, he says, "Man, I'm not keying up the repeater." Well, you know, you can respond back, say, "Well, let me put it on reverse split," and you call in. Okay, go ahead. And you listen, and if you don't hear your friend calling into the repeater, then you know that one, they have either the wrong offset or they have the wrong tone. And the reason why they have the wrong offset because as soon as you key up, your radio automatically steps down or steps up 0.6. And it's real easy to go when you're setting the channel memory channels to get one setting wrong, and as well as it's real easy to fix too. And that's really the easiest way that we use to determine, to help diagnose an issue. So the reverse split is just simply the repeater's offset. Okay. So and again, a lot of times too, we want to hear the traffic that is coming to the repeater. So and the repeater owner can do that. You know, typically, like I said, your repeater settings that you set on your radio is going to be the repeater's transmit frequency, what's coming out of the repeater. There are times when you want to know what's coming into the repeater. That's when you hit reverse split. Make enough sense? So, what term describes the use of a subaudible tone transmitted along with normal voice audio to open the squelch of the receiver? I'm going to take a little break here, just tell you real quick. I got a lot of emails about getting last week's replay, and it said week 1 intro to ham radio. First, I want to remind everybody, keep your eye on the prize, okay? Keep your eye on the test. Don't worry so much about the email that you get. If you'd opened up that email and went to the link, it would have taken you to week 3. So don't get caught up in all the minutia of things. Now, I own that part of the mistake. The way the interface is set up, each week I have to go in and set up and change that description of the class and update it each week. If we remember last week, I had to jump off as soon as I got done with the class to handle emergency communications for Hurricane Michael. And I got caught up in that in the next 3 days, and it just didn't, in lieu of everything that was happening, I didn't get, it didn't come to mind to change that. I did it this week, so the replay you get this week should say week 3. I'm hoping that I fixed that. And I'm going to try to go forward in doing that. But I got a lot of emails on it, just had to say it. Don't worry about the minutia of things, the little small things. Keep your eye on the prize, and let's keep taking this journey together, okay? So it's asking, what term describes the use of a subaudible tone transmitted along with normal voice audio to open up the squelch of a receiver? It's called CTCSS, okay? There are 2 types of tones that a radio in America can be using. And one is CTCSS, continuous tone coded squelch. Okay? And if you can kind of remember that CTC, continuous tone, the other one is, and I don't know why I spelled dual with an E, maybe public education, but dual tone multi-frequency signaling, that's a digital. That is a digital tone setting. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But CTCSS is just a circuit that's built into most radios that help reduce the annoyance and listening to others users on a two-way radio system. Now, here's a really cool thing. CTCSS we use a lot of times for it's the type of tone that a repeater stores. A lot of modern radios have the ability to have tones built into them. And if you belong to a mag group or you belong to a Patriot group, you can set radios to be simplex on one frequency, but you can set a tone for it. Okay? So that when you transmit out, only those that have the tone that you've already predetermined will hear your message. It's just a little security feature that your mag group can use for some real simple security. Okay, Baofangs are everywhere nowadays, but most people don't know anything about CTCSS, and they don't have a clue what it means. And if you've got a little bit of knowledge about it, you can actually use it to your advantage and provide just a little bit of security for your group. Okay. Come on. Okay, let me get. Okay, so here's a scenario of how I want to give you how it might work. Okay, so it's SHTF, and you and your group, you may have a small group at your homestead, but you and your neighbors have formed a coalition of mag groups, and you guys are going to mutually assist each other if one homestead comes under attack from another one can flank and come in and help that other mag group. And it's if you get into understanding mag groups and proper security protocols and things, it's an advisable thing to do. But nevertheless, you can have a frequency that you use within your mag group and have it CTCSS coded so the other mag groups don't hear, because you don't want, just because you belong to let's think about the Indians. Each tribe, they had their own inner culture, and they had their own sense of security. But they never forgot the fact that Indians fought Indians, and even if they, even if they were in the same coalition. So you want to have your own security inside your mag group, but you could have another channel that you decided that your coalition of mag groups are going to use together. And you can set that to have a CTCSS tone in each of the radios. So only those radios that have that tone for your mag group and then for the other channel for the coalition will be able to hear the respective frequencies. Even if the other mag group in your coalition knew what frequency your direct mag group used, they wouldn't be able to hear your conversations unless they went through every one and set those CTSS tones. Okay, so just think of it as a ComSec measure. Real cheap. You've already bought it. It's in the radio. Okay. And the same goes, that's why repeaters use it. Repeaters use it so that only radios that are intended to have that tone set in it can open up that repeater. The only difference is that the repeaters, most repeaters publish publicly that information. And you can get that information on repeaterbook.com. I'll type it into the window. So how do you know if CTCSS is enabled on a radio? So on my radio, I have several radios, but I have a Kenwood, and the Kenwood has a T-sequel setting that tells me that. The Baofeng, I believe it's a T. It'll have a T up in the window. I can't remember which one the Baofeng uses. I have another radio that is a TYT, and it uses CT. So it could have any number of these. So, and it just slightly varies from radio to radio. And I'll tell you that any radio that's been built in the past 20, 25 years is going to have this feature. If it doesn't, it's pretty, if a Baofeng radio at $20 for a handheld has it, I can't imagine any other common or modern day manufacturer not including in theirs as well. So usually that tone setting is going to be buried in your menu settings, but one of the menu headers should say something like CTCSS, or it should say tone. And for one setting under tone, you have the frequency for that tone, and then under another menu setting, it might be something like tone type or something of that, and that's where you would set CTCSS at. So if a station is not strong enough to keep a repeater's receiver squelch open, which of the following might allow you to receive the station signal? This goes back to that reverse split. If I were an NCS and I heard somebody just cracking open the squelch, and then they were closing it, I might, as a talented NCS, that net control station, remember NCS, I would go and hit reverse split on my radio, because you should know all the settings for your radio. You should know how to use your radio. Do not live in this realm that people do of, can you program my radio for me? That doesn't solve anything. All it does is make it convenient for you to turn it on, and you're guaranteed to get caught in a snag when you maintain that mentality for somebody else to program your radio. So anyways, but if I heard somebody open it up, and I know that somebody's trying to open it up because the repeater is opening in and out, in and out, in and out, wavering in and out, then I would know to go over to hit reverse split, and then I can hear as they're trying to get into the repeater. And a lot of times they can check in that way. And then I can turn around and turn off my reverse split, key up and say, KM4ABG, I got you. Into reverse, into the repeater. You barely made it in, got you checked in. So you listen to the repeater's input frequency. Which of the following could be a reason you are unable to access the repeater whose output you can hear? So really it comes down to two things. Okay, so they have this B and C. There's this DCS tone. In America, CTCSS is the most common type of tone used. I'm going to get to what that DCS means in just a moment. But radio manufacturers love, in ham radio, they love to be the first on the block with something. Okay, even if it's the exact same thing as everybody else's, they love to give a unique name to it. It's one of the biggest problems in ham radio that's plagued it for years is there is some industry standardization, but each manufacturer, Motorola is one of the worst ones. Motorola has consistently throughout its history tried to be different than everybody else, even if being different and providing the exact same thing as everyone else. They want to be different in what it's called. So really, there's only two things here that could go wrong. If you are unable to access a repeater, it's only really two things. Either your offset is off, or you don't have the right tone put in the radio. Okay? And you could have the right tone, but you may have it set to DCS tone and not CTCSS tone. Okay? So all these are correct. I've seen a lot of times where the offset will be right. They'll have the right tone frequency, but they'll have the wrong tone type saved to the radio. And again, repeaterbook.com. So I don't know what you guys can see from yeah, James, it depends on the radio, though. Not all radios are going to have CT. I have a Kenwood, it says T-sequel, T.SQL, T-squelch. So this is typically what the repeater screen looks like, if you can see it on yours. And it just has a frequency, the county or the approximate location that it's at, and they give you a tone right there as one of its one of the column headings and what county it's in. So like this one in particular is probably, it's DuPage County, Illinois. In DuPage, it looks like they've got probably at least 24 repeaters here. So, and what they're using next to that is a program called Chirp. Chirp is what you would use to program a Baofeng. Chirp is a free program. You download it. I use Chirp to program my Kenwood, my TYT, my Baofangs. I can use Chirp to program. I think they're up to about 50 different radios that they program. Most people have come to know Chirp as the program for Baofangs, but it is free. All you need is a programming cable. Okay, yeah, okay, so cool, James. So it is CT on a Baofeng screen. Cool. I was wondering what it was. I couldn't remember. Thanks, James. But so if you can't hit a repeater, a lot of times ham radios, folks will call it a ka-chunk, because when you key up, a lot of times the first thing it'll do is when you key up, the repeater will kick back and give its call sign. It'll say, this is W4SNA 179 or 146.79, Soratown Mountain, North Carolina. It's a recording that you'll hear. That's usually, or sometimes it'll just open it up and then you'll hear open air and then you hear ch. And that's the ka-chunk that if you ever hear a ham say ka-chunk when you're talking about repeaters, that's what they're talking about, the ch part of it. Just let you know. So the first thing you want to know is, if you tune to it for a while, sometimes a repeater just goes down and Repeater Book hasn't updated its status. Repeater Book is volunteer based. Repeaters go up and down all the time. They experience issues. So first thing you want to do is, can you hear others? If you can hear others through that repeater setting in your radio, then the repeater's up. If you're not hitting it, then it's probably your tone or your offset that's screwing up. And just go to repeaterbook.com. It's not hard to figure out the website. Just drill down to your particular area and then look for that repeater. Click on the frequency, the first column on that frequency, and it'll bring up a page and show you what the settings are for that repeater. Okay. So what might be a problem if a repeater user says your transmissions are breaking up on voice peaks? Okay. So what they're saying is that your voice when you're talking is it's fluctuating. So typically when you call into a repeater, you should be talking like I am right now. The worst way to talk into a repeater is to go like this and to say that you're listening, it's operational and I'm mobile. You don't want to do that either. So the repeater has a sensitivity level to it, and it's very easy to peak out a repeater. So the general practice when you're talking into a microphone is to put your fist up to your chin and then put the microphone on the other end of your chin. About 3 inches from your mouth is a good distance, is a good practice. And then talk at a level like, what did your parents use your inside voice? We've all said that to our kids, right? We use your inside voice and have a microphone about 3 inches, about a fist length away from your chin. And that's a really good rule of thumb to have. Usually won't have a problem doing that. So what type of tones are used to control repeaters linked by the Internet Relay Linking Project, IRLP protocol? Okay. This is that DTMF I was talking about. Okay. So the echo link, all tones, first of all tones are subaudible. Okay. Meaning you can't hear them. So that can't be the answer. All right. Because they're asking for what type of a tone for a very specific protocol. Okay. Echo link isn't a tone protocol. Echo link is just a communications tool. Echo link, if you remember, is what you put on your cell phones. They have it for the computer too, and basically you're able to perform ham radio operations using the internet and using software, either on your phone, using the data on your phone, or on your desktop. And the good thing about Echo Link is I can be in North Carolina and I can talk to my family in Texas or Tennessee or wherever. I just got to find a repeater that's in their area that I can talk into, and they can be on a radio, an actual keyed up radio in their car. It's really cool. So think about this. Technology's come along, has come long enough, or a long enough distance that I can be at home on my desktop and talk to my brother in Texas as he's driving down the road. And we can do that with just regular $100 Baofeng radio. So he just has to have the Baofeng tuned to that repeater. That the repeater is also a Echolink node. Another term for node is the IRLP node. And then I could do it from my end and use the Echolink interface. Now, when I go to connect to Echolink on the repeater, it will, a lot of times there'll be a voice, a computer-generated voice that will say, KM4 AGB connected. And then when you hear that enough times when you've been in ham radio, you know that means Echolink. Somebody's listening in on Echolink. And then when I go to disconnect, my brother will hear KM4 AGB disconnected. So in CTC SS, you might get these two confused, continuous tone and digital tone. That's how you can remember that, okay? Digital tone and continuous tone. So again, all tones are sub-audible. So while CTCSS is the most common in two-way radio, the DTMF is primarily used in digital comms. So we have Yaesu as a manufacturer of radios. They've come out with their own digital protocol called Fusion. It's pretty good. It's taken off pretty good. Kenwood has one called Wires, I think. I think it's called Wires. That one hasn't taken off as well. Again, everybody tries to come to the block with something new and innovative, and it doesn't always work. D-Star is a very, very popular internet-based communications. It was created by ham radios for ham radio. It's all it's ever been used for. And you can talk to people in England, India, Spain, all over the world. And all you have to do is have a technician license. That's it. So don't think that having a technician license is just so boring. All you can do is talk to a Baofeng. There is so much more out there. It's really all up to you what you want to do. P.25 has to do with trunking systems. So in North Carolina, our law enforcement and first responders use a system called Viper, and Viper is a P.25 protocol, digital trunking system. DMR, we talked a little bit about DMR. We're going to talk a little bit more about it. It is in the past few years, it's been all the rage in ham radio, digital mobile radio. It was created in Europe for commercial radio. It's an open source, and there was so much, it wasn't really getting used very much for commercial. Ham radio found out about it and kind of adopted it, and got some frequency dedicated to it in the band plans. It is just taken off. And the great thing about DMR is that they have special radios, handhelds. They don't look much different than a Baofeng, and they're 5 watts. The other end has to have the same thing, and you know, my brother in Texas could have one sitting in his Lazy Boy, and I could have one sitting in North Carolina, and we can have a conversation like two people with Baofeng sitting in the same city or in the same locality. You can talk across the country on these things, and they run about $80. They're down to about $80 now. When I bought my first and my wife DMR handheld, they were about $130. So they really come down and price quite a bit, like all technology. So again, I want to go back to not to be outdone and to remain extra. Everybody knows what extra means, right? Manufacturers have declared their own technology for the exact same concept. So Motorola calls theirs DPL, General Electric calls theirs DCG, ICOM calls theirs DTCS. And that one, ICOMS has taken off pretty well. There are some repeaters that do use DTCS. So like I said, you could have your radio programmed with a repeater and you're not getting in, and you go and you look, you plug in, you bring up chirp, and you see, I've got the right tone. It says right here on repeater book. Well, you may possibly have that tone correct, but it may be a tone that is using DTCS and not CTCSS. Okay? So I'm being a little sarcastic in this slide, saying, seriously, a different name for the same exact goal. So out of all these, DTCS is the most common, but out of all that's out of these that are listed on your screen, but out of all tones in America, CTCSS is the most common. You'll find CTCSS to be in probably 80% of the repeaters. It's a very small, minuscule. Now, there are some repeaters that are fusion repeaters that have digital capabilities to them, and there are a few times when you will see, when you bring up a repeater, you will see DTMF. That will tell you, that's a clue that that's a digital repeater. If you don't see CTCSS tone or a DTCS tone listed, then you're not going to be able to hit it with an analog, because repeater book typically tries to differentiate between analog and digital, but not always. But yes, ham radio can get this silly. There are things about this hobby that will drive you insane. Anyways, so how can you join a digital repeaters talk group? So what they're talking about here is DMR. So let's talk a little bit about DMR first, see if I get it. So unlike analog repeaters that have one channel in and one channel out, digital repeaters can handle two incoming signals, and they can handle the same two outgoing simultaneously. And the way they do that is with time slots. So when you are talking on DMR, you have channel 1 and you have channel 2, or time slot 1, time slot 2. When a repeater is listening to a digital repeater is listening to a signal, the signal coming in, it's so fast, it's in milliseconds, but it comes in as time slots. It goes 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2, and it's so fast that you don't hear that switching back and forth from 1 2 1 2 1 2. I mean, it's literally, and the digital repeater is smart enough to piece back together what time slot 1 should be and what time slot 2 should be. Okay, and they're able to do this because digital is a much more narrow bandwidth. The signal for digital is so small because all it consists of is ones and zeros, off and on, true and false. Okay, that's digital will always be a choice between two things, on, off, ones and zeros. Really comes down to it in code, it's 1 and zeros. Okay, so it affords the repeater the ability to maintain a public channel that everybody can, that's connected to the internet, that I'm able to, so my local DMR repeater, I could be talking to my brother in Texas on talk group 1, on time slot 1, which is connected to the internet, to the big network, and then time slot 2 is local. Okay, it is just, if you're on time slot 2 and you have it set in your handheld, you're on time slot 2. My brother in Texas is never going to hear me. I have to be over on time slot 1. Okay. Talk groups it's like a 7-digit number, and it's kind of like a passcode to get into a door. If you don't have that, think about it. If I have my own talk group, it would be like, for you, it would be like winning the lottery. It's 1 in 900 and, almost 10 million chances that you could get into that repeater. Into my talk group. So a talk group just enables you to have a little bit more finite conversation amongst a small group of people so that the whole network doesn't hear you. One of the things about digital, about DMR is that the voices that you hear aren't going to sound exactly like the person that they were sitting next to you. And what I mean by that is the people that you hear on digital radio, I often joke and say that it sounds like they took a Xanax, because it sounds really slow and it sounds like they're buzzed on good tequila. Okay, and the reason why is because there's error correction, and that error correction slows down the voice just a little bit. It's very minuscule, and it lowers the tone of the voice too. So the person talking always sounds like they're relaxed, even if they're not. And that's just the error correction capabilities that are built in. So here goes the example that I wanted to show you was, so the same signal that comes into an analog repeater that a Baofeng would utilize is just one channel. It's 12.5 kilohertz bandwidth. And it's one repeater per channel. So with time slots, TDMA, the same can come in, but this, let's say this white one here, time slot 1 is the long distance network connected channel, and then the orange one is your talk groups in your local channel, and they alternate coming in. Now, if nobody's talking locally and there's somebody calling on the network channel on time slot 1, it's still going to come in this way, but the time slot 2 is just going to be empty. It's just going to be dead. There's nothing there. So one of the great things about DMR is here's a couple of things about DMR. With the Baofeng, you have, remember I mentioned you can utilize CTCSS tones to kind of not encrypt your signal, but to close it off. Somebody has to have the right key to get into the door of your frequency to be able to talk, much like a repeater. You can do that on Baofengs. Likewise, over on the digital side of things, you can do it as well. The thing about DMR is that you cannot hear it on a scanner. And the reason why is DMR uses what we call a codec. And a codec is just a code, a coded, it's a programming code. And if you don't have that programming code built into a chip inside the radio, it's just not going to pick it up. So the good thing about DMR is that you and your mag group, if everybody in your mag group had DMR handhelds and you had them set to digital simplex, everybody else out there around you is just going to hear what sounds like a fax machine. They're just going to hear just like a fax machine, a blurb digitally. If that makes sense. One thing about digital as well is it doesn't work nearly as hard to get the signal out, so the battery on one lasts forever. I've left my DMR radio on, and it's lasted me for 4 days, 3 or 4 days. A Baofeng, you're lucky if you leave it on if it lasts you 1 day. It'll probably last you all day, but that's about as long as you're going to get. On a DMR, you can get several days out of it. It really does last a while. So which one of the following applies when two stations transmitting on the same frequency interfere with each other? So, in ham radio, we call it a gentleman's hobby, okay? We police ourselves. And one of the reasons why we're able to do that is because you're issued a call sign that's in a database. On CB has gotten pretty rude. Anybody that's had a CB in the day, you go down the road, truckers are talking about tatas and drinking they just don't really care, you know. And if one guy it just really proves to be a total ass, well, then he can just change his handle and go from snowman to biscuit, you know. And with ham radio, you can't do that. You're stuck with your call sign. You need to make the best of it and make yourself, you know, represent yourself well, because if the community around you deems you as being a jerk, they're not going to be very cooperative with you. They're not going to answer up and have conversations with you. It's going to turn out to be a pretty boring hobby for you. So ham radio, we tend to be very respectful of one another. And so there, and no operator owns a frequency. You can't buy a frequency slot. Bill Gates, Paul Allen when he was still alive, Jeff Bezos, and they can't buy their own frequency. It just can't happen in amateur bands. So generally what we do is one person just simply, if you have two people that are interfering with each other, the one that's operating the net wins the prize, right? Because he's operating a net that he has multiple dozens of people expecting to be on that channel. It wouldn't be productive for him to be the one to move, because now 12 people are going to be on that frequency that you're having to deal with. You need to be the one to leave. So if you encounter somebody and you're both on the same frequency, you find that you're having a conversation and over, you know, and interfering with each other, somebody just be the kinder person and just move to another frequency. Now, there are times in your locality where your repeater a lot of times will get bogged down with I'm trying to find the right word, the most meandering, pointless conversation. And you'll find guys that are just they're not talking about anything special. They're just blabbing to blab because they got nobody else in the car to talk to. I have lived in areas where the repeater was it was constantly being barraged with pointless conversations. It's really up to the repeater owner. He can't kick people off his repeater. He can't forbid them from being on his repeater, but he can send them a nice postcard saying, you know, I'm the owner of this repeater. I'd really appreciate it if you kind of reduce your traffic on the repeater to give other people a chance to use it. We enjoy you using it, but I'm getting complaints that other people are unable to use my repeater because you're always on it. Please, you know, be thoughtful and share the repeater with others. I know a repeater owner might right now that me and the wife know that he would do that. So it has happened. So you just simply move. Again, if you're not running a net and the other person is, the other person wins, because it's only one of you that has to move, not down a frequency. If the person running the net had to, them plus 20, 30, 40, 100 people have to move. Which one makes sense? So what is a talk group on a DMR digital repeater? So it's a way for groups of users that have a special interest to be able to talk to one another. Now, you remember when I told you, see if my next, let me go back to here. If the orange was where that repeater owner decided to put his talk groups out. Now you can have talk groups that talk out, that expand across an area. You know, there are talk groups with people in DMR that are across state lines from one another. Just understand that when your talk group is talking, nobody else can use that time slot. Okay? So it's not that great. It's better, but if you're using time slot 1 for your talk group, everybody else that doesn't have that talk group programmed into the radio, when they key up, they will get a signal back that tells them that that time slot is being used. And when you get into DMR and you understand it long enough, when you key up, and you hear that signal, and then 10 minutes later you go back and you key up and you hear that signal, then you know that there's a talk group that's taking up that time slot. And if you need to talk long distance and they're on time slot 1, good chances you can probably assume that is a talk group talking and using the network. It's frowned upon. Typically, talk groups also have to be programmed into the repeater as well. They have to be programmed into the radios, but into the repeater has to know that address, if that makes sense. So typical repeater owners that own DMR repeaters are not going to put, they're going to put their talk groups on the local time slot 2. Okay, they're not going to put it on the main network, because then all the other repeater owners that are on that network, could be hundreds of them. Now the network is down because that talk group is using the network time slot 1. So I hope that makes sense. So it's just a way for it. What you think of a talk group is kind of like a chat room. You remember Yahoo chat rooms and AOL chat rooms? Maybe I'm showing my age. But think of it kind of like a chat room, just on digital radio, except you have to have a password to get into the chat room or into the talk group. And all it is the talk group's ID number. It's like a 7-digit number, so guessing it doesn't go very well. You have to be specifically given to you by somebody in the talk group. So I just wrote a little bit here to tell you a little bit about it. So again, you have to have the talk group programmed into your radio, but the talk group has to be registered on the network as well. And the repeaters that they all belong to an association with each other. When that talk group is published out there, sometimes, like I've had a talk group created, and it was only in a very specific area of North Carolina, nowhere else. And I had arranged it with the repeater owner, and he had it programmed to his local repeater. It was never published, never shared. So, and I managed to have a repeater owner for my Patriot group, and we had DMR repeater that we were able to use a private talk group on that for my Patriot group. So which Q signal indicates that you are receiving interference from another? Okay, so in ham radio, we have these things called Q codes. Q codes, actually, they're in all communications. There's a couple of hundred Q codes. Aviation uses them, maritime uses them, maritime radio uses them. But we, in amateur radio, we have some Q codes as well. And there's probably 100 for amateur radio. You are only going to have to remember, maybe you will probably only ever use 4 or 5 of them at the most. And they're not that hard to remember. So the first 3 are the 3 that you will use. You will see that used a lot. You will never see QSB. Okay, I don't even know what QSB is. I can look it up, but I know QTH is your location. Where are you at? And I like to think of QTH as the home. Usually my QTH is going to be the home, so QTH. Now, QRM and QRN are quite a lot. That's right, Elizabeth. You need the access code. That's right. So QRM and QRN are quite the same thing. They both have to do with interference. This is a really easy one here. The difference is M is man-made and N is natural. N natural would be something like static. M as in man-made would be there's bleed over from another frequency. This happens a lot on HF. In Amron, we have practice nets. They have one tonight going on in about 30 minutes. And Murphy's Law, it almost guaranteed to happen every time they have a net. You could go the night before they have their net to the exact frequency that net is on, and it is dead silence. The night of the net, there's some jackwagon that it sounds like he's blasting 10,000 watts and he's bleeding over like an entire band. It sounds like he's on top of your roof or he's in your basement. And it's just Murphy's Law way it happens. So we call it QRM, man-made, okay? So the Q codes, and the way the Q codes became popular for ham radio was during the time when Morse code was much more prevalent, because it was a lot easier to use an abbreviation than it was to type out, I am experiencing, interference on this band. You could just say QRM and everybody knew, oh, he's not hearing us. Because in ham radio, a lot of times QRM can happen on your end, but I don't hear it on my end. You might be in California and I'm in North Carolina, and somebody's really close to you is bleeding over on your frequency. We could both be on the same frequency, but you're hearing them on yours, but I'm not hearing them on mine. Okay? So just because interference is happening with one on the same frequency that you're on doesn't mean that you're going to experiencing. So typically, if you're experiencing like crosstalk, bleeding over, that's going to be man-made. If you hear static, you hear there's lightning, lightning storms or whatever, then it would be natural. And again, you're only going to need to know a few. QRM, QRN. So which signal indicates that you are changing frequencies? So there are three here that are used commonly. QRU is never used. I don't even know what it means. QSY is when you're changing frequencies. And the way that you can remember that is when somebody says, let's go to, this frequency. What's your response? Why? Right? So that's the way that I can remember it is, well, why are we changing frequencies? Okay. QSL just means acknowledge. So I could say, this is Natty Green, North Carolina, QSL. It just means this is Natty in North Carolina. Did you hear me? It's like, did you get a receipt of that? And then we have QRZ as well. Okay. So again, they served a real common purpose in CW, but I want to tell you that in emergency communications, we strongly discourage using Q codes, because in emergency communications, we want to make sure that we want to keep it at the lowest common denominator. And that is that somebody that's not an amateur could be getting on our frequency and calling for help. And if we're using a bunch of codes, that person calling in for help may get discouraged or think, and not understand what we're saying and not know what to say. And if we're using everyday language, the person calling in for help will say, oh, these people, I can understand them. They should be able to hear me. Hey, help, help, help. I need help. So we don't use it in emergency communications. We try to stay away from it. Usually Q codes are used in casual conversations and casual nets and things like that. I will tell you also, when you're using repeater work, Q codes aren't very common. You can use them, you just won't hear them very often. And one of the reasons why is because with local repeater work, typically you're going to hear them very clearly. So there's no need to abbreviate things. You could just say, got interference on my end when you're talking on a repeater. So But QSL, you know, I acknowledge, or do you acknowledge? If I said Natty Green, North Carolina, QSL, and you were responding back to me, you know, you could say KM4AGB, QSL. So, meaning I acknowledge. So QSY, well, why are we changing stations? And again, QTH, what's your QTH? You know, you say, and so I just remember the home, because almost always that's where I'm talking. I don't even have I don't have a radio in my car. I really don't want one in my car. I mean, I got a handheld and a go bag, but I don't really care to have one bolted to the dash. I love the hobby, but I'm not about wanting to take down the value of my car, drilling holes in the dash or anything like that. Some people do. To me, I had a car that had an all glass roof, and I had nowhere to put the dang antenna. So now I traded that car in, and I may or may not, but to me, it just Why are simplex channels designated in the VHF, UHF band plans? Why are simplex channels designated in the VHF, UHF band plans? We're going to take a break here in just a second. So, you know, stations within mutual communication range can communicate without tying up a repeater. You know, the fact is that if you have privileges to it, any frequency can be a simplex. Think about it. You can set your radio to the simplex of a repeater. The only problem is if you set it to the repeater, you're going to be bleeding in over on the transmit side of the frequency. Because you remember when you key up, it drops, or it rises, or it drops 0.6, right, for the offset. So any frequency basically can be a simplex frequency. There's no hard designated rule that this frequency is only for simplex. Once, if you were at a campground, once you went to, so every year in Dayton they have this huge, it's like the Super Bowl of ham radio. It's called the Hamvention. There's got to be, at any given one day, 5,000, 10,000 ham radio operators. All of them are walking around with handhelds on their hips. How well do you think, if we only had a few simplex channels assigned, how that would work over, right? So just remember that. Where may single sideband phone be used in amateur bands above 50 megahertz? I don't really have well, I surely didn't have an answer for that because I didn't even put one in there, right? Let's see here. Dolt. Just try to remember that one. I'm not sure how I could give you something to kind of remember that. I will tell you that every band that I know of in the band plan has a portion that is set aside for some data. So single sideband phone, you know, you can be on a frequency and go just to the sideband of that frequency and be able to use it. So, which of the following describes a linked repeater network? So when you look at any of these down here, always think when you hear linked repeater, first of all, it's the only one out of all these answers, it's the only one that has network in both the question and the answer. There's your dead giveaway, right? I mean, it's literally giving it to you there. When they say linked repeater, they mean a network. So you put that together in a network of repeaters where signals received by one repeater are repeated on all the repeaters. Now I'm going to stop after this because I want to tell you about this first. But so these cars here, we're going to take a break here in a second. But these cars here, they need to be tied to this repeater, like the arrow, this yellow arrow says, okay? Because that's the repeater they can listen to. But think about some like linked repeaters. Think about Think about like your state police. You know, you can have, especially in a metropolitan area like Los Angeles County, California, San Diego, places like that. They could have multiple repeaters around the entire county that are linked together, so that one car, in that particular instance, those cars have an automatic switching in them. It'll scan a certain number of frequencies to lock in on the one that works. But the point is that for these cars here to talk to these cars, the red to be able to talk to the red cars, talk to the green cars, they would have to be talking on repeaters that are linked together. Okay. Now this is important because here in North Carolina, Virginia, we have what we call the HERES repeater network. So after 9/11, the hospitals realized that in times of a natural disaster or a national crisis, when other primary forms of communication are down, hospitals came up with what we call the Hospital Emergency Amateur Radio System. So all these little pins that you see are hospitals that have an amateur station. They have a 2-meter radio or a 440 radio. It's usually 440, 70 centimeter, but 440 in the hospital. And on their roof, they have an antenna. Somebody in that hospital is a ham radio operator. Okay. And every day, they have a HERES net. And all these repeaters will link together. Okay. So that this repeater here in Spartanburg will test with hospitals in Roanoke. And they're all on the same repeater. They can't hear each other directly, but Roanoke Hospital's talking into their repeater, and it's linked on a same network as the hospital in Spartanburg, and they all have a net, and they can all hear each other throughout that net. So every day they test their system, every day, okay, to make sure that it's up and running and that it's operational. And then when they're done with that net, the network breaks, and then all these repeaters go back to standalone. They're not always linked to each other. They just link them for the net, and then they unlink them. And most ham radio operators in these areas, so I'll tell you that, you know, I'm located somewhere around Rock Hill vicinity, okay? And that repeater links up for this net, and then when it's not, I can talk into it and like it's an everyday repeater. But when I hear that HERES net, I know that as an amateur radio operator, let them do their test and let them do their net. Don't interrupt them and don't participate in it. It's really only for hospitals to participate in. And it's really cool. Think about it, right? That's how we want, that's the kind of network that we want to be able to have in an emergency, is that you can link these repeaters up, get your business done, and then unlink them when the emergency's over with. I'd say that in the radio community, we've got a long way to go with that, but the hospitals, nevertheless, are doing it they should be. It's the most important place that it should be. So most DMR repeaters are linked together. They are linked repeaters. So down here in the Southeast, what we have, what we call the PRN network, and that's usually time slot 1. So if you turn your radio to time slot 1 on your local DMR repeater, you'll be able to talk to radios in Florida that are on time slot 1, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, and just you can have regular conversations with each other. Now, if I only want to have a conversation with somebody locally, I can turn to time slot 2, and then I can talk locally while the network is still up and people can talk on that. So if I'm talking to my brother in Texas on a DMR repeater on time slot 1, time slot 2 locally is still available while I'm talking, and I can't hear it. But they can carry on communications through the same repeater using time slot 2. Okay? So take a break. We're going to take, it's 9:20 right now. We're going to take about a 5-minute break or so, and come back and see if we're going to get into section 3 and see if we can get some work done on it. Be back in about 5 minutes. Anybody have any questions you want to ask while we're on a break? We got a couple more minutes. We want to take advantage, and that way we don't get too far. So Jack said, does ham affect neighbors' TV these days, like high wattage CBs used to, or has cable taken care of that? Good question, Jack. So yeah, typically now that TVs are in the digital frequency, you know, we don't have analog TV anymore. You don't see it nearly as much, but you can have a little bit of cross interference. In other words, if you're using enough wattage, I don't care what you have, if it's using the airwaves and it's near any kind of high power, you could, and especially if that high power is keying up, keying off, keying up, keying off, keying up, keying off, you could get a little bit of static while it's keying up. That is, but not like it used to. It used to be that while somebody was talking, you almost heard the conversation through the TV. No, you don't get that anymore. It's not very common. But you're in the right direction, Jack. You know, with cable and satellite being all digital now, it's pretty much taking care of that. So Dean, no, I've got about 4 different groups in this class. I've got well, I'll leave it for personal security reasons, but I've got from all different walks of life in this group. So I've got friends in low places, so I managed to pull people from the shadows and from the light and teach them equally. It's up to them, and it's up to you how you want to reveal yourself. Okay, we got about 1 more minute, and we're going to get back into it. I'm hoping we can get into 3 and kind of fly with it. So Jack, did I answered your question? I want to make sure that I want to answer them when you guys ask, but I'm so pressed with time to get to these questions. There's so many that I kind of rely on other people in the chat to answer them for me. But if I can, I'll get in there and I'll answer it when I can, because I don't like being ignored, so I don't want you guys to be ignored either. Any other questions? Okay, we're going to go ahead and jump back in here. We've only got a few in the C, so we're up on the second. So what this T2C01 is it's sub-element 2, Section C, the first question. Okay? And so I want to get to T3 tonight, and it only goes up to C as well. So when do the FCC rules not apply to operation of amateur stations? Never. They always apply. Now, here's the caveat, though. Sometimes they're not enforced. Okay? And why they're not enforced is because you, as the ham radio operator, under normal conditions, are always held responsible to the FCC rules, Part 97. But if somebody's experiencing an emergency at home, say I fall over, or there's a natural disaster, hurricane comes in, knocks a tree over on top of my roof, my kid can come up and turn on the radios and just key up and scream into it, help, help, help. Okay, all of you hearing that, you guys hearing it are held to FCC rules, but she's not, because it's a matter of life and death. Okay, so the rules always apply. They're just not always enforced. And really in ham radio, it's just common sense, right? I mean, when should the rules apply, and what rules should apply when it comes down to life or death? You know, I think all of us are willing to break some rules when it comes to life and death, you know, even on behalf of others and for ourselves as well. You know, there are no rules, right? So what is meant by the term NCS used in net operation? Okay, so the dead giveaway in this is that it's the only answer that has net in it, in the question and in the answer, right? So net control station is all it means. Okay, and it's just in the nets, the net control, he really is just a traffic cop. That's really all he is. I mean, he is the boss. Almost all nets are going to be what we call directed nets. In other words, you just don't key up and start talking whenever you want to, and the reason why you can't do that is because in a net, it could be 20, 30, 100 people. Without you being in the room and seeing people's body language and seeing their mouths start to open, we don't have any idea when somebody else is talking. If you don't direct the net, everybody will key up on top of each other and cancel each other out. So the job of the NCS is just to maintain order and efficiency during a radio net. So typically he'll take check-ins. He'll ask, is there any priority traffic or announcements? And then he will go into a roundtable phase where as he's taking check-ins, he's writing down the call signs as he's hearing them. Every couple of handful, he'll say, break, break, break. I have the following station so far. And he'll name the station. And he'll say, okay, who's calling? Please call now. And then people start again, and they call in. And then he gets to so many, and then CS will say, break, break, break. I have the following stations. And then when he's done, he'll say, who's calling? Please call now. And when he starts seeing it slow down, and what that does, it gives you the ability to hear your call sign, him calling it back, and then you don't have to keep calling in. You know, if during one of those times between him doing a summary of his check-ins, you don't hear your call sign, well, then what you can consider is that you got what we call stepped on. And it's nobody's fault. Nobody was trying to be rude. We just don't know when, as a radio operator, you have no idea when somebody else 50 miles away is keying up at the same time. So you just simply wait until there's a time and you call in again until you hear NCS call back your call sign. And you just keep trying patiently and politely until he gets it. He's not trying to be rude or ignore you. Nobody's trying to be rude or ignoring you by stepping on you. It just happens. So, again, and usually the NCS will start out with a preamble to his net. And usually the preamble, it'll state what the net's about, what's the theme of the net. He might announce what this week's topic of roundtable is going to be. He'll introduce himself. He'll tell you, exactly how he's going to run the net. And usually, a lot of times when they do the check-ins, they'll say, I'll take check-ins at this time. we'll start with priority traffic and announcements. Anybody have priority traffic or announcements? Please come now. And then he pauses a little bit. And that's where I was telling you that when you go to turn on and get to a frequency, that little pause that NCS may be giving may be the time when you think that the line is open and you can just start talking. How bad would you feel all of a sudden you keyed up and said, hey, how's everybody doing? This, and just start talking away. So that's why you want to listen, because then he'll sit there and he'll give it a minute. Okay, there is no priority or emergency traffic at this time. Do I have any short timers? And the reason why he'll say that is because some people do not want to wait, or they don't want to participate in the roundtable, but they want to give the net some participation, or what we say, they like to give the net some love. So he wants to check in and say, hey, I participated in, because nothing's worse when you're NCS to hold a net and you don't get any check-ins. It's the worst feeling in the world, or you only get one. You do that enough weeks, and after a while, after a short time, you start second guessing why you're doing it. So, I've had nets where I had 30 short timers check in and I only had 4 people that checked in but weren't. So in other words, after check-in, I only had 4 people to participate in the roundtable, but I had 34 check-ins. So would that be a good net? I think so. So what should be done when using voice modes to ensure that voice messages containing unusual words are received correctly? Pretty easy. We just spell them out phonetically. And you want to use a uniformed phonetic alphabet. Now, I lived in an area where I had a guy that would call in, and his name was Bill. And he would say, hey, this is Bill, as in, boy, I love ladies. He never got a laugh. When he should have said Bill, Bravo, India, Lima, Lima. And then when you do ham radio for a while, this phonetic, if you've been in the military, phonetic alphabet, or you've been a first responder, or the phonetic alphabet should it should be so second nature that it just pieces itself together. It just happens for you. Other folks, if you don't have those type of backgrounds, it'll have to grow on you, but it will. And when you hear it enough times, when somebody means to say A, they say alpha, you won't have to register to think about it. But when they say apple or anaconda or alligator or automobile, your brain has to think for a second there. And that second could be another check-in coming in if you were NCS. So we try to stay with a uniform phonetic alphabet like this you see here. It's used across all standards: maritime, aviation, police, fire, military. Why change something that works and works well? So what do Races and Aries have in common? Funny, we had this conversation the other night with some friends. Sorry, I have to take my medication. So at the end of the day, they both do the same thing, and that's emergency communications, period. Okay? So, just remember, while both of them serve the same purpose, one does it for FEMA, and the other represents ARRL. Okay? One is a government agency, one is a private entity. You will hear more about Aries in the ham radio community than you will Races, because Races, they practice on a more on a closed. Usually when Races practices or they train, it's in a closed environment. Aries, when they train on the amateur bands. You can hear it. So in North Carolina, we have a park here called Hanging Rock. It's a very popular hiking destination. And years ago, they used to have lost hikers on Hanging Rock. as well as there is a couple retirement homes that are up on the face of it. And they used to have bad cases of the elderly with dementia and Parkinson's wandering. So they would practice. Aries would team up with local search and rescue teams and provide communications, and they would have like a dummy, like they would use I don't know if you ever seen those little batons they used to train duck dogs, you know, the orange glowing little rubber squeaky things. They might have one of those, and they'll set it in the woods somewhere, and search and rescue has to go find it. And it might have a beacon on it, you know, something that's fairly decent size, and you'd be able to tune up on on 2 meter or 440 and be able to hear it. So Aries is something that you'll hear a little bit more common than races. But so what do you do to belong to either one? Aries usually, any of your local radio clubs in your area are going to have a Aries unit more than likely. And you can feel free to join. I encourage you to join your local radio club. And I'll say this, I'll preface this. When you go to take your test, you pass and become a technician, do yourself a favor and go join your local radio club. Membership is only like $20 a year, but that $20 goes towards that repeater that you're using for free. You're not required to pay, but why not give your local radio club some love and support them a little bit? And then once you're a member, if you ever have an issue, most of them have some kind of chat forum. They have a way that they chat with each other between meetings. If you're a member of a club, you have a wealth of information as a new ham to be able to tap into for $20 a year. I mean, it just makes common sense. So join your local radio club, okay? In the past 4 or 5 years, I've moved around a lot. We've recently bought a house, but everywhere we've moved, me and my wife have always joined the radio clubs that in the local community we belong to. Even if we don't attend their meetings, we go to one meeting, we fill out a membership application, and we paperclip $20 or whatever the fee is, and we may never go back. You know, but it's just a way that it's just kind of feeling like you want to support something that you use for free. And it could be something that saves your life one day as well. So what does the term traffic refer to in net operation? So when you're in NCS and during your preamble, when your preamble is done, a lot of times you'll hear them say, is there any formal traffic or emergency traffic or priority traffic? They'll use any one of those terms interchangeably, but they'll say traffic, and it just means formal messages. Okay. Now, we don't do it quite as much on the regular nets that you hear, but they used to have a form that you would have to that they used to fill out, and we're going to get to it. I'm going to show you what one looks like. But formal traffic is really considered just critical information that needs to get passed from one party to another, and they're using the net to do it. So if a radio club is having a net and there is a member that needs to get a hold of the Aries representative, he may use the formal traffic segment of the net, because right up front in the beginning, before everybody tunes out and walks away or whatever, he'll say, you know, his call sign will say, I have formal traffic for, and then he'll give the call sign of the Aries rep and say, and his traffic may be, I need you to call me at the listed number, at my listed number on the club roster. So formal traffic could also be happy birthday to somebody. You know, that's considered formal traffic as well. Is there any priority traffic at this time? And somebody will give their call sign, say, you know, KM4AGB net control. The net control say KM4AGB, go ahead. KM4AGB will say, I'd like to wish happy birthday to Joe Dirt. You know, so Which of the following is an accepted practice to get an immediate attention of the net control station when reporting an emergency? You can begin by saying priority or emergency, but what I found in ham radio is you'll get people use break, break, break. No matter if it's in the middle of a net and you're not participating in the net, it's the only time when you go to turn on your radio, if you have an emergency, say you just got into a traffic accident, your 2-meter radio is set to a local repeater. Your cell phone went flying somewhere in the car. You cannot find it. You can turn on your radio without even listening for traffic and just go break, break, break. And if somebody is talking, ham radio operators know to shut up. Break, break, break means stop talking. And the person will proceed on what their emergency is. Likewise, if people are listening to the radio but not talking on it, participating in anything, and they hear break, 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 they know to stop what they're doing and listen to what the emergency is. And then somebody can come in and respond and say, I've got your emergency. I'm on a landline now. Give me your location. And they're helping them. Okay? So, again, typically they'll start it with break, break, break. And then you might hear somebody say, break, 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 emergency, emergency, break, break, break. And then they'll go on with their traffic. Okay. On the HF bands, a lot of times what you'll hear is QST, QST, QST. It means basically calling all stations. Okay. It just meant to get everybody's attention. It's basically like saying, hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. Listen, listen, listen. Which of the following is an accepted practice for an amateur operator who is checked into a net? So a typical practice would be just to remain on the frequency without transmitting. Once you checked in, let everybody else check in and just sit there and patient and listen. The net control will say when he's getting to the round table, and typically net control will go by order in which people check in. So why should the first person check in be the last one to be able to talk at the round table? Right? So first one checks in, is first one that gets talked at the round table. So you just wait until they call your call sign. Now, one of the advantages to being the first to check in is you get to be the first one to talk on the round table, and then you can walk away. But if you're the first one to check in and the first at the round table, you haven't heard everybody. You don't really have a whole lot of conversation to base your comments on, right? So if you're in the middle somewhere checking in, you have a couple of people who checked in before you and have started the conversation, and then you can piggyback off of what somebody else said, or elect that person already, I was going to say that, now I don't have to. I'll say this instead. So there's always advantages to be the first one to check in as well as to be the last person to check in. Likewise, if you're the last person to check in and the last one at the rain table, half the people in the net are probably already left. Because once they give their input to the round table, they usually hang the mic up and they walk away from the net. So again, it's just, he'll give the NCS as he's taking check-ins, he'll pause, he'll stop the net, and he'll give a summary of the check-ins he has so far, just as a courtesy to let you know if you got you checked in or not. If not, and he just kept taking check-ins, and then he gets to the round table and never calls out the people he checked in, you could be sitting there for 20, 30 minutes waiting, thinking that he's going to get, you heard this person, you believe you got in behind this person, checked in. Now he's asked for that person in the round table, and then he calls somebody else next for the round table and not you. You're like, wait a minute, did I get skipped over? No, he didn't hear you. So once you checked in, just patiently wait, and that's all. Which of the following is a characteristic of good traffic handling? First and foremost, rule number 1 in ham radio, pass a message exactly as you got it. If the spelling is wrong, if the verbiage is wrong, that's not your job to police the message. Your job is to pass the message exactly. There could be a reason why the message was passed the way that it was. It was said the way that it was said. There could be a reason for that, and it's not your job It's just like an intelligence gathering. The gatherer just gathers it and passes it on to the analyst. It's not his job to break down and make sense of it. That's the analyst's job. As a radio operator, you could be getting intel coming in. It's your job to pass that on to an analyst for them to work it out and what it means and to piece it together in a puzzle and all that. You don't have that kind of time as a radio communicator in your MAG group or in your Patriot group. Your job and your sole job is to get that message and pass it on. Get the next message, pass it on. Get the next message, pass it on. And if you're able to do that, you'll always be Johnny on the spot and be able to get that full message as it comes in the first time, and be given enough time that maybe you need a repeat. You didn't get it all the first time. Okay, so pass the message exactly as you heard it. You know that trick where everybody sits in a circle and somebody starts off with a message in somebody's ear, and then you see how it goes around ear to ear to ear to ear until the last person says what they heard. We've all done that, right? It's kind of embarrassing sometimes. It's like, how did we get to that when we started out with this? Don't know why I put the Did anybody know what WHOH is? Apparently, it's a new word that I created. So, yeah. Anyways, public education doesn't mind. Bad, huh? This is what a formal message traffic looks like. Okay. So we have a number that we put in we have a number that we put in here, and that's important because, like, during a natural disaster, it's important that I number my messages because, like during Hurricane Florence, I was getting, at one time I had 5 or 6 messages that I was working with. Imagine the guy that I was passing them on to, my point of contact, he had 20 messages, and the guy he was passing on to had 50. So we have to number them with some kind of nomenclature. The check column, that is really super important. It's probably the most important area in all this entire message, because that's where we put the word count. So if I said, I want to wish you a happy birthday, I would put 7 there. I put 8 there, sorry, 8, the number 8. Then when the person that gets the message, they're going to expect, okay, check, I need 8 words. Okay, I've got 8 words, message complete. Now he's got his verification to the best of his knowledge by the check number that he got a complete message. If it says 10 and he's only got 5 words here, he needs to kick it back and say message incomplete. Please resend. And the whole idea of this formal message traffic is it should contain all the information that is needed. We have a precedence. A precedence has a number hierarchy. I believe it goes 1 through 5, and 1 being absolutely critical emergency, and number 5 down to 5, which is like the most informal, non-emergency, congenial, personal message type. Okay, and it's important the place of origin, so we know exactly where the message started from. They have a system called NTS, National Traffic System, and you can have they practice originating a message in one area and see how many stations it takes to get to its destination, and see how complete the message is when it gets to that destination. And sometimes it could be a station in Arizona that's trying to pass a message to Washington, D.C. So place of origin will always be Arizona. Okay, and the call sign that originated it. That will never change to the life of this message, no matter how many people it goes through. Okay, so check is the most important. You may not have a message number, but that check number is the only thing that you have to go by to tell you that you got a complete message, or the best indicator. So how's the hard copy form passed? It's not. You're keeping it for your personal record. You keep this end of it, and somebody on the other end that receives it, they're filling in this part. Okay. Now, digitally, we have forms that we fill in using FL Message or FL Wrap or FL Amp, and it will automatically populate these. We fill out the digital form on our side. It converts it to a digital message, sends this digital message, and on the other end, they get it on their end, and it gets deciphered. It gets decoded back into, or encoded back into, a message form like this. So no, we don't fax it. We don't do anything like that. Now, if we were verbally giving this, there is we would give it by fields, and the people listening know exactly what fields to fill in first and by what order. So if I said M13 5 3 KM4 AGB 8 Arizona, you know what I mean? They know exactly what fields to put in. Are amateur station control operators ever permitted to operate outside the frequency privileges in their license class? Again, remember, really, when you look at this, so let's look at these answers here. So even if you're part of FEMA and you're part of RACES, you still are only allowed to operate within your class privileges. Okay, FEMA and RACES does not give you, being a part of those organizations does not give you any kind of special license to go outside of your privileges. You can be a part of FEMA and RACES and only be a technician class, but they're going to restrict you to just local communications. Okay? They're already going to know ahead of time what your privileges are, and they're already going to have you placed. You know, a sector boss in FEMA is already going to know. He's already going to have a comms representative that's already going to have your record and already have you placed on what your duties will be. Okay, but in times that involve in the immediate safety of human life, yes. If you're a technician, you're working for ARES and you're in an EOC, an Emergency Operations Command Center, and you happen to walk by radio and somebody's saying, help me, please help me, I'm dying, you can pick up that radio and start talking to them. Even if it's an HF radio, even if the radio doesn't belong to you, you can pick it up and immediately start corresponding with that person, and nobody's going to fault you otherwise or get you in trouble. But again, the FCC rules always apply. They just aren't always enforced. A little bit of a trick there, right? But nevertheless, what information is contained in the preamble of a formal traffic message? So in the preamble is all of this. Okay? This whole part here is the preamble. And it basically is the part that is needed to track the message, to be able to tell where it's coming from, where it's going, what its importance is, its message number. It all goes right here. And again, remember I told you the check is the most important of all those. What is meant by the term check in reference to a formal traffic? We've already discussed that, just the word count. So here's one filled out. Perfect example of one filled out. So precedence, I told you it was a number. They have, R is regular, so this is just a regular message. I think P is priority, R regular, I informal. I forgot what the acronym was to use, but there was an acronym used here. It says check 14. So let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Think you got a pretty good indication that you got the complete message that said 14, you got 14 words? I think so, right? So this is a perfect example of what one might look like. We don't count the signature as being a word count, okay? So, anyways, what is the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, ARES? So it's just a group of licensed amateurs that have voluntarily registered their capabilities, their qualifications, what they can do with a registry service. So in North Carolina, I belong to what is called North Carolina AUXCOM, Auxiliary Communications, and one of the minimums that you have to have in order to be on that, you have to have a technician license, you have to be over 18, you can't be convicted of any felonies, and you have to have your FEMA certificates, 100, 200, 700, and 800. There's 4 of them that you need. They call them ICS 100, ICS 200, ICS 7. So ICS is so, and they actually have, so I have 100, 200, 700, 800. They have a 300, a 400, a 500, 600, a 900, and they've got some in between that. But those are the 4 that AUXCOM has, that centers really around the structure. It's important that as AUXCOM you understand the command system, the structure of it. So you know what the different chiefs and different bosses are in the structure and what their responsibilities are. And so you know exactly who you're answering to, and to have some preconception of how things are handled. If you get a message, you know, it also helps you understand the message that you're getting to. There may be static, there may be some noise in the background, but if you understand the structure, sometimes that can help you understand what the message is trying to say. And you get that message, don't paraphrase it, get it exactly as you heard it. And if you don't hear a word, then just put a dash. Okay, so. And ARES is part of ARRL. I have my personal opinions of ARES. I'm not a big fan of them. I believe, you know, in recent years they've kind of failed at what they're doing. I don't want to rag on them too bad, but like Florence and Michael, those are 2 hurricanes that directly affected my state, and I was never called up for North Carolina AUXCOM. I know that there was calls down in Florida for amateur radio operators, and it didn't go out through. It didn't go. The golden rule in ARES is in AUXCOM is that you do not self-deploy. You do not just load up your car and go to an area on your own without being deployed, because there has to be accountability. Somebody has to know that you're going. If you turn up missing, if there's a follow-up natural disaster and you get lost in that natural disaster and you self-deploy, nobody knows that you deployed. Nobody knows to go look for you. So we do the golden rule in ARES and RACES. We do not self-deploy. We have to be activated, and we have to be deliberately told where to go and who to report to. What is that acronym? So ARRL is American Radio Relay League, and then ARES is Amateur Radio Emergency Service. But ARRL is like, it is to ham radio what the NRA is to guns. That's the best way to explain it to you. They'll send you letters telling you you need to join them to protect your band privileges and to protect your ham radio privileges. They'll make you seem like tomorrow you're going to lose them if you don't give them your money, just like NRA with your guns. So they're typically found in all the amateur radio or clubs throughout the country. And usually ARES team, the local radio club will have an ARES team that works very closely with the county's EMS, emergency management system. So, yeah, so the only requirements to join ARES is just a willingness to serve and a valid license. You have to be over 18. There's a couple little things, but other than that, it's really not all that hard. So it says possess FEMA Incident Commands, it's command system training. Those aren't hard to do. They're online. They're free. You go out there and you type in FEMA ICS and you work your way through and you'll get to them. They're really not that hard. They don't hide them deep. And again, you don't have to pay for them. You don't have to go through any hoops. You just register for the class. It's online, self-paced. They give you all the materials. And if you play your cards right, you can bring that stuff in locally and then take the quizzes that they have afterwards. And use open book to take the quizzes. So the one that I spoke about a minute ago that requires 207, that's the ICS, FEMA ICS. Aries requires 100, 200, 700, and 800. There's 4 of them. Aries requires those for you to be registered with Oxcom, which is I don't know what it's called in other states. Every state has a little bit different. North Carolina, Oxcom, it is, sorry, that's my work. That little chime you hear is my work computer. Means I'm getting emails. Okay, now you're pissing me off. So that's just to get you a little familiarized with the command structure is those certificates. So with that said, it's 10 o'clock. I'm going to kick in with the next slide. The next slideshow. If you want to stick around for that, you're certainly welcome to. Want to keep your discard. Okay. I am going to fire up section 3. From the beginning. Okay, let's get to we're Oxcom, I'm sorry, KC, it's AUX, like auxiliary. I'm sorry, that's what you were getting at. Oxcom, AUX as in auxiliary communications, Oxcom. And North Carolina's called NC Oxcom, and they work with the State Emergency Management Services, EMS. I'm a little bit of a loss as to what the relationship is now because a couple of hurricanes now, and I haven't heard a peep out of them. But I myself, I don't rely on, I work with Amron, and I found that I get Amron, AMRRON. I'm going to type into the chat. That's Oxcom. And the organization that I work with, that I am representing to give you this class, is Amron. Okay. So I'll go into a little bit. We're going to go to, I'm sure some people are going to, we'll go for about 15, 20 more minutes and then we'll cut it. I want to get into this. I don't want us to get too far behind. I'm trying to give you, is there something like that in Oregon? There is. Sam, Oregon, Washington State, especially with the wildfires and mudslides and earthquakes that you have on the West Coast areas, it's pretty common on the West Coast. You just have to, the first place to look is to start with your local amateur radio club. Type in your county in Oregon. I used to live in Multnomah County. So I used to live on Mount Hood in Government Camp, and I know Multnomah. I'm sorry, Clackamas County. I don't know why I said Multnomah, but Clackamas County. I know they have an amateur radio club, and you just type in Clackamas County amateur radio, and usually you'll get something. and do the same for your county. So section 3, we're going to get into radio wave characteristics. You can expect 3 questions on this. 3 questions. So let's go and we'll kick into it and try to go through most of these, or some of these at least. So what should you do if another operator reports that your station's 2-meter signals were strong just a minute ago, but that now they're okay? See them? So Gresham, absolutely. You know exactly where I lived in, government camp. I worked at Timberline Lodge. So were strong just a moment ago, but now they are weak and distorted. So just try moving a couple feet and changing the direction of your antenna if possible. Okay. So reflections could be causing what we call multi-path distortion. Okay. And what that means is if you're in your car and you're driving and your signal is coming out your antenna in all different directions. Okay. There could be an obstacle between you and direct sight of that repeater. Could be a hill, it could be, but your signal still hits the repeater because it reflects off the face of the buildings. And because you're moving, one minute you were doing really well and the next minute you weren't, the reflections that when your signal's deflecting off of a building face, maybe you came across a building that doesn't that is absorbing your signal. You know what I mean? So multipathing, all it means is that your signal is taking multiple paths, and because of that, they're arriving at the same location but very slightly behind one another. So it creates distortion. It creates a kind of a weird audio. You can kind of tell when it's multipathing. Sometimes it sounds a little bit like an echo. So, but your signal, a lot of times, radio waves are just really tricky. If we haven't caught on to that with this class yet, radio waves can be a little bit tricky. We'll just say that. And right when you think you can't hit a repeater, you're able to. You know, you're told as a technician that 2-meter and 440 FM or VHF and UHF are line of sight ground plane, and how objects can get in your way. And then all of a sudden you catch yourself in some place like downtown Charlotte or Miami or Atlanta, and you're able to hit a repeater 20 miles away. And with your handheld, it's like, well, how am I doing that? All these buildings are around me. Because your signal is bouncing off the faces of those buildings and getting out of the downtown area, and they're hitting that repeater. So multipathing, again, is just your signal is taking multiple paths to get to the same location. And sometimes they don't all arrive at the same time. Would DMR correct this? No. DMR, the great thing about DMR, I'll tell you, is that it either works or it doesn't. There's no static on DMR. If it doesn't come to the repeater, so DMR has an error correction. It has a little header on the front of your signal that says what your call sign is, and what repeater it's coming from, the network name, things like that. If part of that signal reaches the listener's repeater before, or if it hits your local repeater before the header does, then it's just not going to it's not going to piece it together, and it won't transmit, and you'll get a tone back that tells you that it didn't that the repeater didn't receive your message. So DMR does a little bit of error correction, but there is times when especially with multipathing can be minor, it can be major. You could have a lot of multipathing and signals greatly vary arriving at the destination at the same time. They don't, and that's when you really have some error issues. So what might the range of a VHF and UHF signal be greater in the winter? Okay, so when you look at these answers, there's really only one that really makes sense. Okay, if you know that VHF and UH is ground plane, it's ground wave communications, there's really only one thing that is really affecting you the most. Now, you don't think about your radio working better in the winter time. But use this example here. If you were standing in the middle of this on the left and you hollered out help, how far do you think that your voice is going to carry to get out of this dense vegetation? Now, if you did it on the one on the right, how far do you think you screaming help is going to go? You probably make it outside the forest. And the reason why is because vegetation contains water, okay? And water absorbs radio signals. The higher the frequency, the more the water will absorb it. And because 2 meter and VHF and UHF, water has a great effect on the signal, whereas it doesn't quite as much on HF. So when it's raining really hard, times when you couldn't get into times when you a repeater that you can always get into, it's possible that it could rain so much and there's so much moisture in the air that you don't hit that repeater. It's possible. Okay, so so your signal gets out further in the wintertime because there's not as much foliage and vegetation between you and your destination. There's not as much water absorbing the signal. So again, just ask yourself, if you were in a dense forest and you screamed help, or you're in a forest that all the leaves were on the ground and the trees were bare, which one would your voice carry the farthest? What antenna polarization is normally used for long distance weak signal? Remember, CW is Morse code, right? Long distance weak signal, Morse code, and single sideband contacts using VHF and UHF bands. Okay, the one thing that you have to understand is that we don't really worry so much about right-hand singular or left-hand right-hand circular or left-hand circular. You can really eliminate those answers from this question. Really, when we talk about in terms of a radio wave, in your antenna would be a vertical or horizontal. So if a UHF and VHF signals a ground wave, and potential obstructions to your signal are most likely going to be a fixed location on the ground, a tree, a building, a mountain. Just remember that long distance implies over the horizon. Okay, so with this question, they're saying long distance is in the question. And just remember, usually when you're dealing long distance and you look off at a distance, usually the horizon is your obstruction. So just think horizontal, okay? So you can send a signal in any polarization you want. And now look here, when they're talking about polarization, I hope this picture helps you out here. What they're talking about is your antenna. With VHF and UHF, you almost always want to have a vertical polarization. You want your antenna to be up and down. You want to hold, when you're talking on VHF, UHF, you don't want to hold your radio to the side. Try it sometime and your signal won't be quite as strong as if you hold it up and down so that the antenna is pointing to the sky. If you hold the radio in a way that the antenna points to your side, the signal doesn't carry quite as far. What can happen if the antennas at opposite ends of a VHF or UHF line of sight radio link are not using the same polarization? So the signals could be significantly weaker. So you ever taken polarized glasses, 2 pairs, and set them one in front of the other and try to look through both lenses? You can do it, but if you take one pair of glasses and turn them sideways, it changes the whole perspective of what you can see out of the lenses. And sometimes, you remember the old days when 3D first came out, you had one red lens and you had one blue lens. Anybody have a 3D TV now? They tried to make them take off, and they just didn't take off very well. But you got a pair of glasses with those that were just, they look like lightly tinted sunglasses. They did away with the red and the blue. Well, what they did was they polarized one lens vertically and another lens horizontally. So one signal coming from the TV was given through the horizontal line so you could see it, and the other part of the image was vertically, that was, it was offset a little bit, so it gave you that fuller 3D effect. That's how they accomplished that with accomplishing 3D with glasses that are just look like they're tinted. Yes, always with VHF and UHF, golden rule is it's not so much the power, it's the height of your antenna. Antenna on your roof. I have an antenna on my roof right now. I can tie into a 5-watt handheld, and I can talk 30, 40 miles with it. Unscrew it from my window and screw in a rubber ducky antenna, and I can talk 5 miles. So yes, taller the antenna, the farther up. Think of in terms of repeater. Repeaters are on top of buildings. VHF and UHF repeaters are on top of buildings and mountains for a reason. It's the same reason you should adopt that same concept for your radio station to get out far. When using a directional antenna, how might your station be able to access a distant repeater if buildings or obstructions are blocking the direct line of sight? So sometimes if you can find a different path to reflect your signals, basically is what they're trying to say. So with a directional antenna, you know, you're directing your signal very focused in a very deliberate direction. A normal antenna, the signal's going everywhere, 360 degrees around you, and it's bouncing off of buildings and off of hard objects all around you. Okay. With a directional antenna, that's not the case. Here on the left, this is an example of a directional antenna. It is sending a beam directly in a specific direction. In the picture on the right, I gave an illustration that shows a house with a directional antenna, and he's directly pointing it to a face of a building so that he can reflect off the face of it to hit the repeater, because there's a tall building between him and the repeater. It's just another trick in your arsenal to use to accomplish to getting your signal out, because as a comms guy of your mag group, of your Patriot group, your job is to get that signal out and to get that signal in. Nobody around you is going to care why you can't do it. You just need to get it done. All right? It's just like a medical guy. You know, the medical guy's job is to save you when you're hurt. Nobody cares how he does it. Just do it. Get it done. So use whatever trick is in your bag to get it done. You know, and wartime, I've seen pictures of guys taking alligator clips and clipping it to barbed wire and using the barbed wire fence as an antenna. Special forces guys learn that stuff all the time. So just want to use that as a side note there. But what term is commonly used to describe the rapid fluttering sounds sometimes heard from mobile stations that are moving while transmitting? So I want you to cue in on mobile stations while moving. And what that's called is picket fencing. And this is why it's called picket fencing. Because here's a line that is, this is your radio wave. Okay? This is your signal. As you're passing along this fence, this is your signal getting out. The parts that are behind the fence slats you can't hear. Those are obstructions. Only the signal between the gaps is getting out. So that's why I pointed at this signal here is getting out. This one here, unfortunately, this part of the signal is not. Only the parts with the red dots are getting out. So that's why it'll sound like somebody's coming in and out, in and out, in and out. If you ever heard somebody, you know, a kid running down the sidewalk and he's singing a song as he's skipping, the song is going in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. And that's how we came up with the term picket fencing. So if I hear somebody that's just fluttering in and out, I will respond to them and tell them, you're picket fencing, man. Picket fencing. Try again later. And let them wait. And the best thing he can do is either he can go to he can stop and pull into a parking lot and pull over and say, can you hear me now? And if I say, yeah, then he has to stay there for the conversation. A lot of times you will see picket fencing happen quite a bit in urban areas where there's a lot of buildings. That happens a lot. What type of wave carries radio signals between transmitting and receiving stations? So a radio wave, all a radio wave consists of is electrical current and magnetism. So your radio wave is considered electromagnetic. And none of these others really make sense. So you have the red is your electric field, and you have your blue, which is your magnetic field. Okay. The maroon arrow here is just time. They're just signifying what the time is. A wavelength is the amount of time it takes for a signal to return to a starting point. So at the peak of this wave, the wavelength is how long does it take for that wavelength to reach the next peak? And that's considered a wavelength. But just remember, radio waves are also known as electromagnetic waves because they have both electric and magnetic field components to them. Which of the following is likely to cause irregular fading of signals received by ionospheric reflection? So this goes back to the multipathing, okay? So, and what they're talking about here is the ionosphere. We talked about this, I think, 2 classes ago. During the day, you have 5 layers. It starts with the D. I think it's 4 or 5. It's D, then D, E, then F1, F2. D and E, and the reason why we have those layers is the ionosphere is charged ions that help reflect radiation of the sun away from Earth. Doesn't reflect all of it, but without the ionosphere, us humans, we would cook like eggs. Okay? And what they're asking here is, as the signal, this primarily deals with HF operations. But when you have a signal that hits, when the ionosphere has different densities throughout it, this one layer, the D layer, the E layer, is not one consistent density. Some areas of the D layer are going to be denser than others, and it has to do with temperature. It has to do with radiation being more intense in one area than another. Okay, if we have solar flares, we have things like that. All these things are phenomena that play into the atmosphere. If the signal comes from all different paths, it's going to arrive at shortly different times and at different strengths. Okay, so it'll sound like somebody's fading in and out on you. We'll get to 2 more, and then we're gonna call it. Which of the following results from the fact that skip signals refracted from the ionosphere are elliptically polarized? Okay, so to explain the answer that we got here, unlike VHF, UHF ground wave communications, antenna polarization is not quite as important in HF as it is UHF and VHF, because UHF, VHF are ground wave, and HF uses sky wave. It's really not nearly as important. But so skip signals, or what we call skywave propagation, can be used to communicate beyond the horizon. And this last illustration showed that. The signal goes up, bounces off the ionosphere, and that's why I here in North Carolina, I'm able to talk to a station in California. I'm able to talk to South America. My signal's going up, hitting the ionosphere at a certain angle, coming off of the ionosphere, and where it's landing, you know, and it's not a 360-degree proposition either. You know, I may be 2,800 miles from California, to the west of me. 2,800 miles to the west, to the south of me may not be able to hear me, but to the west they can. They may be able to hear me from the west and north, but they don't hear me from the east or the south. So it's not a 360-degree proposition. Elliptically polarized signals have a vertical and horizontal component, and the receiving antenna needs to be received by the same polarized type of antenna. If it doesn't, it can tend to be, it can come in weak. So what may occur if data signals arrive in multiple paths? James Leonard, you asked, would DMR correct this? I'm about to answer that. So when we're talking about if data signals arrive multiple paths, say DMR, when we read these answers here, when we think of data signals, when we think of data, out of all these answers here, error is the only one that has error in it. And when we have data, especially when it's a signal, your main concern isn't static. Your main concern is error rates. How many errors are going to be in that signal? Because with data, either works or it doesn't. When it does not work, it's an error. Okay? And simply with DMR digital signals, it's off or on. There is no gray area. It either you hear the voice or you don't. You hear the signal or you don't. It's on, it's off, it's 1, it's 0, it's true, it's false. No gray area. Okay? So when the same signal propagates over multiple paths, the different paths will generally be a slightly different distance and different angle. And because of that, the signal arrives at the destination from these multiple directions at multiple times. So, you know, and this is where I go to explain about the data signal contains a header bullet. You can call it a number of things. I call it a header bullet. It's what I learned in college, just a header. And it contains info about the signal, where it originated, who originated it, the time, date, things like that. It'll all be timestamped. Everything will be in that little header. Sometimes the signal will get there before the header. Okay. Well, not all digital repeaters are intelligent enough to hold on to one piece and wait to see what else it gets, and then assemble it, and then put back, you know, and send back out the parts that it needs. Packet radio can do that. But your typical voice, your typical data repeaters, they aren't quite that smart. If they get the data, if they get the header information and it doesn't contain the full message, it might be broken up. The signal might be broken up. But if it gets a signal before the header, it has nothing to distinguish what it is. It just won't compute it. It won't transmit it. Does that make sense? I hope. So it needs that header information. It's just like on a network, on Ethernet, when you're in an office and you send somebody on the second floor an instant message. It leaves your computer and has a header on the front of it that says what station, what IP address originated that message. And it also says what IP address its destination is. Well, if the message gets there before the header, it's not a message when it comes to digital. The header has to come first because that explains everything to follow. And which part of the atmosphere enables the propagation of radio signals? We only ever really worry about the ionosphere when it comes to propagation. Okay, magnetosphere and stratosphere, stratosphere is what you're living in, what you're breathing in every day. I'm sorry, troposphere is what you're breathing in every day. All right, stratosphere is I believe is the layer closest to Earth. I mean to space. Man, I'm getting it all wrong today. Troposphere is what you live in, what you breathe in. Stratosphere is the final layer between space and Earth's atmosphere. So ionosphere is what we work with, because the ionosphere contains charged ions that help reflect of varying densities, and depending on the density and depending on the frequency that you are sending will depend on whether or not the ionosphere is capable of reflecting that signal or allowing the signal to burn right through. That's why 2 meter and 440 being such a high frequency, it burns right through the ionosphere and just keeps going into space, and it doesn't land anywhere. It doesn't go anywhere. Okay, it is now 10:30. We're getting to go. Dave, appreciate you showing up, man. Glad you could be here. We're cutting off, and I'll take some questions for a little bit. You guys, my wife said that the replay got sent while we were having this class. I'm not sure. I have to go look. But if you go to www.preppernet.com/tech, I've already put up this PowerPoint we're on right now, 3. I've done 2, I've done 1, and the welcome PowerPoints are out there on PDF. The first 2 classes, the video is out there. All your class materials are out there. This 3rd class I will have uploaded this week, but in case that replay email, there's something wrong with it. I tried to correct things this week, but apparently it got emailed instead of an hour after the class ended. It must have been an hour after the class began, and I have to find out why. I hope that I'm teaching you guys, and I hope that you're understanding that I'm not losing you. I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. I really, truly am, because I know how confusing it can be. If you have a question you don't understand, email me, hamtechclass@gmail.com. Put it in here, hamtechclass@gmail.com. I've been pretty good in trying to get your questions when you've asked me during the week, and trying to get to them. So ionosphere is what bounces signal back towards Earth. That's right. The ionosphere is just it's an atmosphere filled with charged ions, and those charged ions is what reflects a electromagnetic signal. And depending on the frequency of that electromagnetic of that electromagnetic signal, depending on the frequency of it is, and how dense the charged ions are in the atmosphere, will tell you whether or not the signal gets bounced back. So during the day, 10 meter and 20 meter work great. At night, they don't. They don't work quite as well. 40 meter is a general purpose. Usually works all day. It works good at night. During the day, works a little bit better at night though. So 2 meter and 440, they just burn right through the atmosphere. They just keep going up into space. It's too high of a frequency for ionosphere to grab it and reflect it back to Earth. So it just keeps going. Can you list books that we can use with this to help? So let me go over to Amazon.com. I'm going to type in tech class, tech license. There is one book that I recommend, but you'd have to. Let's see here. On the on that preppernet.com/tech, I put on there a no nonsense guide. You can read that, That will help you quite a bit. I put on there a PDF book on repeater basics to help you understand repeaters a little better, because repeaters are all is such a central part of technician that I felt like I wanted to try to clear the fog as much as I possibly could. There's that resource. If you go to Amazon and you type technician, type FCC technician license, you'll see a bunch of books there. I highly recommend, his name is Gordon West. Just type in his name. There's another book, Ham Study School, that is really good. I had those when a couple classes that I taught a couple years ago. If you go to YouTube and his name is David, I think it's Kessler. Let me see here. David Kassler. Let me type in his name for you. If you go out to YouTube and you look for this guy, David Kassler, he has some really good YouTube videos out there that really break things down. He didn't do it this test, 2018 to 22 question poll, but the 2014 to 2018, he went through the whole book, and basically what I'm doing, he did. And I won't lie to you and tell you that he helped give me the idea of doing this class in a webinar. I kind of based this format on seeing that. So I have to give him credit there, but he does a really good job of explaining things with illustrations or whatever. David Kassler is really good. Yeah, hamstudy.org has flashcards. They help out a bit. I can even tell you that some of the notes, I won't ever lie to you, I'm an open book, but some of the notes that I took for this class to be able to, I got from hamstudies.org. I go through a bunch of resources, and the reason why is I don't want to feel like I'm stealing somebody else's material, but sometimes it's hard to put concepts into words in an easy enough way for you to understand them at the level that I'm at. I don't want to overshoot it and explain a technical term too technical to you. So sometimes I go out here and I search the net and try to find the best explanation, read it, and then I form my own words for it and then put them on the PowerPoint. That's honestly how I work it. There's no miracle work here. I don't know everything. I understand everything, but how to explain it to others, I think you guys get the idea. So AM radio fades at night. That's partially true. AM does work a little bit better during the day because the AM frequencies do burn through the atmosphere. They don't get reflected. So that is partially true. Yes, only section 1 and 2 because we just got into 3, Eddie. You might see up here top T3A11. We just started the 3. I will get this one uploaded this week. Yeah, but section 1 and 2, you should see the PDF for section 3, I believe. I hope. The video, I've only got sections 1 and 2 because we just got out of 2 here in week 3. Again, we're a little bit behind, so I was hoping that I would be able to finish this section 3 up, but I think that we will get done in time to, we'll be able to cover everything. So, but, yeah, abbreviations, man, there's a lot of them, and yeah, I'm trying to do the best I can explain the abbreviations and how I remember them, like QSY. Why are we changing frequency? QTH, the home. QRM, man-made. QRN, natural. Both of those are interfering. You know, those are things how I've remembered them always, because I can't say that I have. I had really fun high school years. I'll just say that, and so I don't have the absolute solid memory as an adult, but nevertheless, that's how I remember them. So, okay, Kathy. Anybody else got any questions before I cut out here and hit the rack myself? Okay. All right, Lee, and we'll talk to you guys later. I'm going to jump off too. If there aren't any more questions, I'm going to give it 5 more minutes, 10:45, and then I'm cutting out myself. I'm going to write T3A11 is where we left off. I appreciate that, Eddie. Yes, so you were in Gresham. I worked at Timberline Lodge for a while, and I lived in government camp, and then I moved down to Portland before Antifa took it over. Didn't spend a whole lot of time in Gresham, a little bit in Troutdale and things like that, but I miss McMiniman's restaurant, missing the fresh microbrew right out the cask. So there's some things that I miss. I miss fishing for rainbow trout and best fishing around up in the Cascades. So there's things that I miss I can't describe to people here on the East Coast. But there's parts about North Carolina that I wouldn't trade for the world. There are truly some majestic, pristine areas in North Carolina that are just it's absolutely God's country. So, as an extra, how often do I have to renew my same as you? We all of us, no matter the class, it's 10 years. Doesn't matter. And then we all have the same grace period, the 2 years. So I just renewed mine. This year, in fact, earlier this year, I had to renew mine. It was up. So I've had my license for 10 years now. Yeah, I guess 10 years. But I just renewed it. You're having difficulty signing into Preppernet? Yeah, I don't really control it. I'm kind of a free agent. I kind of represent Preppernet and Amron. Preppernet is just paying for the interface that we're using. If you're having difficulty signing in, maybe there's a lost password link there. Having difficulty signing, you have to give me more information, Sherry, and I'll see if I can help you. But Dean, yeah, Dean, we all have the same license thing. The only difference between me and you getting your technician is just privileges. That's it. Not even intelligence. I'm no more intelligent than you, or I met some technician guys that should be extras. They just too lazy and don't want to go get the extra license. I know a guy's a technician. He has 3 or 4 repeaters he owns. He does Earth, Moon, Earth. He talks to the International Space Station, but I don't know why. This guy probably could get take the extra test and not even think about it. His name's Dave, but he doesn't want to. I don't know. Beats me any day, man. All right, folks. If you have any questions, hamtechclass@gmail.com, and I'll try to answer you. And hopefully the replay link that you get, I put week 3 in it this week, so it should have changed, and it should give you the whole class, I'm hoping. So anyways, have a good week, study, and and let me know if I can help you any. You guys stay safe. God bless, and we'll talk to you later.